make families, help them with the cost of living by raising their taxes. So I'm really pleased we kept our promise to cut taxes for 32 million people. As the economy grows, can I ask my right honourable friend to make sure that we both continue to cut taxes and spend money on our priorities in the balanced way that works for everyone in our country?
I thank my right honourable friend and say to him, of course, he's absolutely right. The budget did cut taxes for 32 million people, and the rise in the personal allowance will leave a basic rate taxpayer over £1,200 better off next year than in 2010. But in helping people with the cost of living, it's not just those income tax cuts. The rise in the national living wage next year will give a full-time worker an extra £2,750 in annual pay since its introduction. And of course, by freezing fuel duty, we've saved the average driver £1,000 compared to pre-2010 plans. And we will continue to help people with the cost of living with our balanced approach to the economy.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in sending our sympathies and our solidarity to the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. The attack was disgusting, depraved and appalling, and I'm sure every single member of this House would completely and unreservedly condemn it for what it is. I will also be joining the Prime Minister to commemorate Armistice Day and remember all those that lost their lives in the First World War and indeed all the other wars since. Mr. Speaker, if I were a prison governor, a local authority chief executive or a head teacher, I would struggle to find much to celebrate in the budget. I would be preparing for more difficult years ahead. Does the Prime Minister think that analysis is wrong?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that actually if you look at what we set out in the budget, we set out more money for schools, we set out more money for prisons, we set out more money for prisons. What we have set out in the budget is that austerity is indeed ending. And what is? And what does that mean? Ending austerity? Ending austerity is about continuing to bring debt down and put more into our public services, and we'll set out our further details in the spending review. But ending austerity isn't just about putting more into public services. It's about putting more money into people's pockets, as my right honourable friend has just made clear. What we're doing in this budget is giving the NHS the biggest cash boost in its history. The right honourable gentleman used to ask me what taxes will go up to fund the rise in funding for the NHS. The answer on Monday, it's fully funded without putting up taxes.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Just for the record, the words that I quoted were from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. Non-protected departments face a real terms cut of £4.1 billion. The Prime Minister promised austerity was over. The reality is it was a broken promise budget, and she knows it. With violent crime rising, police numbers slashed and conviction rates down, why did the government fail to find a single penny for neighbourhood policing in the budget?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, we did put extra money into CT policing in the budget. That was on top of the £460 million that has been made extra, that's been made available for policing in this year. That is in sharp contrast to what Labour was saying at the 2015 election when they said the police should take 10% cuts in their budget.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, this is just another example of the contempt in which the government holds police officers. Who said that? Not me, the Police Federation. No wonder the Police Federation and police chiefs are taking the government to court over their pay. Mr. Speaker, with school funding cut by 8% per pupil, does the Prime Minister and her Chancellor think the little extras are enough to end austerity in our schools?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, what we actually see happening, as I said earlier, is more money announced in the budget for schools. That's on top of the 1.4 billion, on top of the 1.4 billion pounds extra that's already been announced for schools this year, and there'll be a further 1.2 billion going into schools next year. And actually he's wrong, because overall per pupil funding is being protected in real terms by this government. What do we see in the budget? We're ending austerity, we're bringing debt down, we're putting more money into our public services. We're taking the country forward. What would he do? His policy would mean borrowing more, taxing more and wasting more, and taking us back to square one.
Many schools, including mine, have had to resort to asking students and their parents for funds. Not me, Sasha, a parent worried about the future of her school, because this broken promise budget means that head teachers will still be writing begging letters to parents. And can the Prime Minister explain why she chose not to end the benefit freeze for 10 million households, but instead brought forward a tax cut for higher earners?
Can I say, actually, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we have put extra money into universal credit in the budget. What we see importantly is universal credit being a welfare reform that ensures that people are encouraged to get into the workplace, and when they are there, they earn more. But I'm interested that the right honourable gentleman chose to raise the question of tax cuts. On Monday, he said that cutting taxes for 32 million people was frittering money away on ideological tax cuts. Yesterday, the Shadow Chancellor said Labour would support the tax cuts. On Monday, the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, talked about tax cuts for the rich. Yesterday, his Shadow Chancellor said what we've always known, that the tax cuts were for middle earners, head teachers and people like that. So when the right honourable gentleman stands up, perhaps he can tell the House whether he will back the tax cuts and vote for the budget.
Are you done yet? Mr. Speaker, the...
Order. It doesn't matter. I've got all the time in the world. It will take as long as it takes. The right honourable gentleman will address a House that has the manners to listen, and the same goes when the Prime Minister is speaking. There will be a decent display of respect, and we will go on for as long as necessary, as the public would expect, to ensure that that's the way we operate. That is all there is to it. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The benefit freeze takes 1.5... If you'll wait a moment, I'll explain what my question...
Order, Mr. Hands. Calm yourself, young man. You're getting a little overexcited. I know you've already asked a question. You blurted it out to the best of your ability, and we're most indebted to you. But now is the time to keep quiet. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the benefit freeze takes 1.5 billion from 10 million low and middle income households. A low-income couple with children will be £200 worse off. For them, there is no end to austerity. Labour would have ended the benefit freeze, and as she well knows, Labour policy is to raise taxes for the top 5% and for the biggest corporations in the country. That would be a fair way of dealing with financial issues facing this country. And can the Prime Minister confirm? Will she kindly confirm there is still another £5 billion of cuts to social security to come in this Parliament, if it lasts till 2022, hitting the incomes of those with the least? Will she confirm that? Yes or no?
I say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, what he fails to mention from the budget is that as a result of the changes we've made on universal credit, 2.4 million people will benefit by £630 a year. And when he talks about helping those who are on low incomes, yes, we're helping people who are on low incomes. We're saving people money by freezing fuel duty. That's been opposed by the Labour Party. We're letting people keep more of the money they earn by cutting income tax. That's been opposed by the Labour Party. The right honourable gentleman keeps claiming that he's backing working people. But I say to him again, if he wants to put more money into people's pockets, if he wants to take care of working people, he should vote for the Conservative budget on Thursday.
I'm really not very clear whether that was a yes or a no, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister once claimed to be concerned about burning injustices. Well, that concern's fizzled out well, hasn't it? This was, Mr. Speaker, a broken promise budget. The Prime Minister pledged to end austerity at her party conference, and the Chancellor failed to deliver it in this House. The cuts continue. Those on lower incomes will be worse off as a result of this budget. Austerity has failed and needs to end now. But, Mr. Speaker, it's very clear. Only Labour can be trusted to end austerity and end the cuts to those on lowest incomes and invest in our country again. So now we know councils, schools, police, prisons.
I think order. Members can shout as long and as loudly as they like. Order. And if they feel that they want to indulge themselves doing that, so be it. The right honourable gentleman's question will be heard. Well, yes, when it comes, it will be heard in full. So don't waste your breath and damage your voices. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure some of the members opposite won't have heard what I was saying at the end, so I'll repeat it for their benefit. So now we know councils, schools, police, prisons, public sector workers and those reliant on social security will face years of austerity. Will she apologise for her broken promise that she was going to end austerity, because she has failed to do that?
First of all, the right honourable gentleman talked about my commitment to tackling burning injustices. Yes. Oh, yes, they say from the front bench opposite. Indeed. Was it Labour that introduced the Modern Slavery Act? No, it was me. Was it Labour that made sure that people in mental health crisis were not being taken to police cells as a place of safety? No, it was me. Was it the Labour Party? Was it the Labour Party that introduced the race disparity audit, so for the first time we can see what's happening to people from across our communities in this country? No, it was me and this government. And I'll tell him what else this government has done. I'll tell him what else this government has done. By taking a balanced approach to the economy, careful financial management, what do we see? Borrowing down, unemployment down, income tax down. Oh, up, they say. Well, I'll tell them. Oh, I'll tell them what's gone up. Support for...
Order! I said that the right honourable gentleman must be heard. The reply from the Prime Minister must be heard. The Prime Minister.
The Labour benches want to know what's gone up. I'll tell them what's gone up. Support. As long as it takes, I'm going to tell you. Support for public services up. Growth up. Wages up. Debt is falling. Austerity is ending. Under the Conservatives, the hard work of the British people is paying off.
Robert Halfon!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Click Sargent, a wonderful cancer charity for children, has found that families in Harlow face a 54-mile round trip to get to their nearest treatment and are costing them up to £161.58 per month. Average families taking their children for cancer treatment are paying £180 per month. Given the huge £20 billion increase to the NHS budget, would my honourable friend meet with me and Click Sargent and introduce a young cancer travel fund to help these families with the cost of living?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for his question. He raises a very important issue, and obviously our thoughts are with those children and their families at what must be a really difficult time for both the children and their families, and we do continue to look at what we can do to help them. I believe that when he talks about children from his constituency going to the nearest specialist treatment centre, that is Great Ormond Street, which does wonderful work in this country for children. We do have a healthcare travel cost scheme that does allow patients to receive a reimbursement for their travel costs if they're in receipt of a qualifying benefit on a low income. But we absolutely recognise there's more to do, particularly for the cost of living for cancer patients, including children and young people, as my right honourable friend has raised. And I know that the relevant Minister from the Department for Health and Social Security will be very pleased to meet with him and the charity to discuss this further.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the remarks from the Prime Minister regarding the Tree of Life massacre and, of course, on Armistice Day? Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister guarantee the supply of medicines to the NHS in the light of a no-deal Brexit?
Say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, as he knows, we are working for a good deal for Brexit, and as he will also know that all departments, and indeed we have issued technical notices to businesses and others, are making contingency arrangements should a no deal occur.
Ian Blackford.
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, that was no answer to the question that can the Prime Minister guarantee the supply of medicines in the light of the no deal? Mr. Speaker, why did this government last week quietly begin a dramatically truncated tender process to try and stockpile medicines at a cost of tens of millions of pounds? Funds that should be spent on frontline health services. The Prime Minister has only been concerned about how Brexit might harm the Conservative Party. It is time that the Prime Minister woke up to the real harm her Brexit policies could cause to patients. Prime Minister, isn't it the truth that this government is in a blind panic trying to cover up for a blind Brexit?
No. Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, First of all, if he had been listening and paying attention over the last months, he would have known that actually in the budget last year, the Chancellor made clear that there was money available for no-deal planning. We stepped up the no-deal planning in the summer. Departments like the DHSC are ensuring that they're making the responsible contingency decisions that any government department would make. What we are doing is working for a good deal in Brexit, and we're working for a good deal that will benefit the whole of the United Kingdom, including Scotland.
Peter Boone.
Mr. Speaker, I always thought the Chancellor was a bit iffy about Brexit, but how wrong I was, sir. This week he announced a Brexit dividend budget if we come out of the European Union with no deal. He will be able to cut tariffs, abolish VAT on certain products and reallocate the £39 billion that he was going to give to the EU in this to this country, cutting taxes, improving public services and lowering debt. Prime Minister, I always thought that you could be the Queen of Brexit, but did you ever think the Chancellor could be the King of Brexit?
Can I say to my honourable friend that I'm pleased to see the support my honourable friend shows for the Chancellor. What the Chancellor delivered this week was a budget that is good for people up and down this country, and we should all be celebrating that.
The Pierce.
In 2014, I wrote to HMRC and the then Chancellor to ask how much tax was unpaid on letting income from private landlords. And they wrote back to me and said it was 500 million in their estimate, which is enough to build around 7,000 social homes. How much is that tax gap now?
Can I say to the honourable lady that in overall terms we have been closing the tax gap over the years. As I think my right honourable friend the Chancellor said in his budget on Monday, since 2010 we've actually, through the work we've been doing to close the tax gap, to ensure that we deal with tax evasion and avoidance, we've collected £185 billion, or protected £185 billion of revenue for the government.
Steve Double.
Mr. Speaker, it's 47 years ago this week that the UK's last space launch took place through the Black Arrow project. Many of us feel that's too long. With the confirmation of a vertical spaceport in Scotland is very welcome. The real prize is to be first to market with horizontal launch capability. As the Prime Minister will know, Spaceport Cornwall is well placed to deliver this prize. But will the Prime Minister confirm that the government remains ambitious to be a first mover on horizontal launch, and will she back Spaceport Cornwall's bid?
Can I say to my honourable friend that he's raised a very important issue, and he is, as I would expect, championing the cause of Cornwall in this, as one or two other of my honourable friends from Cornwall are also supporting him in that. We have awarded grants worth £31.5 million to enable satellites to be launched from UK soil, and we've also announced a £2 million fund, subject to business case, to help boost airports' ambitions to offer what he suggests, the horizontal space flight, and that includes sites such as Newquay, Glasgow, Prestwick and Snowdonia. The UK spaceflight programme is continuing to consider these leading proposals, and I'm sure will have heard my honourable friends championing of the request for Cornwall.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the member for Bassetlaw, has told me about the harrowing evidence he witnessed during 3 weeks of hearings by the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, investigating Nottinghamshire councils. And I've also read some of the survivors' courageous testimonies. I hope that when the inquiry panel publish their recommendations next summer, the Prime Minister will accept them in full. But the survivors need help now. A suggestion that's come forward is that a small amount of money for the survivors' groups would have a disproportionate impact, providing support and encouraging others to come forward. Will she ensure that resources are made available to provide that help now?
Can I say to the honourable lady, she's raised a very important issue, and I'm pleased that I was able to set up the inquiry into child sexual abuse. As I said at the time when I did it, I think people will be shocked to know the extent to which children were being abused in this country in many different environments and circumstances. She's raised a particular issue in relation to Nottinghamshire, and of course when the report of the independent inquiry comes forward, we will look at their recommendations very seriously. And I will ask the relevant minister to look at the issue that she's raised about the survivors groups. We did work, I did when I was at the Home Office, work with survivors groups. It was talking to them and hearing from them that made me realise exactly how terribly badly people have been treated, the appalling crimes that had been committed and the appalling abuse that they had suffered. And that's why it's important that this independent inquiry gets to the truth.
Mr. Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following the welcome call overnight from the American administration for the ending of the Saudi bombing campaign in Yemen, will my right honourable friend use Britain's undoubted authority at the United Nations to press for a new Security Council resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire and meaningful and inclusive negotiations to end what is the worst and most terrifying humanitarian catastrophe on the planet?
Oh, and I thank my right honourable friend, who I know has been consistent in pressing on the needs of the people of Yemen. And we certainly back the US's call for de-escalation in Yemen. He references our role in the United Nations Security Council. In fact, in March we proposed and coordinated a UN Security Council presidential statement which called on the parties to agree steps towards a ceasefire. This remains our position. But as my right honourable friend, the Minister, said in the House, I believe, yesterday, a nationwide ceasefire will only have an effect on the ground if it is underpinned by a political deal between the conflict parties. And my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, discussed this matter with Martin Griffiths, the UN Special Envoy, last night. They agreed that the UK will continue to encourage all parties to agree to de-escalation and to that lasting political deal which will ensure that any ceasefire will hold in the long term.
Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Young women are dying because if they're aged under 25, then they can't get a cervical smear test, even if they have the symptoms relevant and even if their GP wants one. So will the Prime Minister take the easiest decision she will be asked to make this year and abolish this arbitrary age limit and in doing so save women's lives?
I say to the honourable gentleman that I recognise the issue that he's raised. It's one that has been raised before. Of course, on issues like this, it is important that we take clinical guidance on it. But of course, issues about the future of the NHS and how it operates are matters that the NHS are themselves considering as part of their long-term plan for the future.
Fiona Bruce.
Would the Prime Minister welcome the acquittal this morning by Pakistan's Supreme Court of Asia Bibi, the young Christian wife and mother of 5 who has spent over 8 years in prison, mostly in solitary confinement, facing the death penalty on blasphemy charges merely for drinking water from a communal supply? And will the Prime Minister in particular commend the courage and integrity of Chief Justice Saqib Nizam for the message he has sent out regarding religious freedom for those of all faiths and none in delivering this judgment, setting Asia free and rectifying a great injustice?
Thank my honourable friend. And the news out of Pakistan of the release of Asia Bibi, I think, will be very welcome to her family and to all of those who have campaigned in Pakistan and indeed around the world for her release. Our long-standing position on the death penalty is well known. We call for its abolition globally.
Chris Ruane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since 2010, the number of rough sleepers has risen from 1,700 to 4,700. We now have homeless tent encampments outside on Victoria Street. Homeless charities believe that one of the main reasons for this huge increase is the botched introduction of universal credit and a general hostile environment towards the poor. Can I ask the Prime Minister why she believes the number of rough sleepers has shot up by 268% on her watch?
Say to the honourable gentleman, we recognise that we need to take action in relation to rough sleepers. We have a commitment to halve rough sleeping by 2022, to end rough sleeping by 2027. That's why we have already published a strategy to deal with this. We have put initial funding of £100 million into this, and there are pilot projects being worked in various parts of the country in relation to this issue. And I hope he will, if he is interested in this issue of rough sleeping, I hope he will support the proposals that the government has put forward that were confirmed in the budget for increasing stamp duty on those who are purchasing properties in the UK who don't live or work in the UK. That money to go into supporting people who are rough sleeping.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend join me when she goes to the cenotaph next Sunday in paying tribute not only to our own war dead from this country, but to those 3 million who came from the Commonwealth to serve in the cause of freedom? I will sadly not be in Tunbridge this weekend. I will be laying a wreath in Delhi, paying my own tribute, and I know on behalf of this whole House, paying tribute to those who suffered and died. Will she join me also in wearing a khadi poppy at some point? The reason for which is the homespun cotton that remembers Gandhi's and India's contribution to the effort is a vital reminder to all of us here of our links around the world, but particularly to India.
Can I thank my honourable friend for highlighting this vital contribution that was made by soldiers from around the Commonwealth, and he has highlighted particularly those from India. And I also pay tribute to my honourable friend for his own military service. We must never forget that over 74,000 soldiers came from undivided India and lost their lives. 11 of them won the Victoria Cross for their outstanding bravery, and he will know they played a crucial role in the war across multiple continents. I'd like to also congratulate the Royal British Legion and Lord Guardian for their efforts in recognising this contribution with the special Cardi Poppy, honouring the sacrifice of everyone who served served a century ago. And I will certainly be interested in wearing a Cardi Poppy at some stage over the period as we lead up to Armistice Day, just as I'm pleased to be wearing a ceramic poppy today. Oh, the honourable lady from the front bench opposite says she is wearing one of them. I'm very pleased to see that. And I would also like to say I'm very pleased to wear the ceramic poppy today that I see that a number of honourable members are wearing, which were created by children at a school in the northwest. And St Vincent's, indeed. And it is very important, I think, at this centenary that we all recognise and that younger generations understand the immense sacrifice that was made for their freedom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What does the Prime Minister say to a local primary school who have written to me in desperation as they are struggling to cover their basic pay? The budget offered just a tenth of the money already cut and can only be spent on the little extras. The Chancellor said that schools struggling to keep teachers, save subjects or maintain hours could now buy a new whiteboard or a laptop. But what use is a whiteboard if there's no teacher to use it?
I say to the honourable lady, as I said earlier in response to the Leader of the Opposition, we were already putting £1.4 billion extra into schools this year. We're putting an extra £1.2 billion into schools next year, and the £400 million announced in the budget comes on top of that £1.4 billion this year. And crucially, overall, per pupil funding is being protected in real terms.
Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, you quite rightly referenced the centenary of the First World War. Wouldn't that be a very fitting time to end another burning injustice, namely the legal scapegoating of brave army veterans by others for political or financial gain? Last week, 104 of your Conservative colleagues, with members opposite over 50 members of the other place, including 4 previous chiefs of the Defence Staff, wrote to you and asked you to join with us in defending those who defended us. I know there are only 104 of us, but nevertheless, are you with us?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I recognise the passion with which he has championed the interests of our brave soldiers, and we owe so much to them across so many different areas and so many different fronts for their heroism, for their bravery, for everything that they have done to maintain our freedom. He has, of course, raised particularly in the past and now this issue that was raised in Northern Ireland questions as well about the question of the legacy concerns that there are in relation to what happened during the Troubles and cases being taken against actually not just soldiers but police officers who also bravely defended freedom in Northern Ireland and acted against the terrorists. We are committed to making sure that all outstanding deaths in Northern Ireland should be investigated in a way that is fair, that is balanced and that is proportionate. The current mechanisms are not proportionate. There's a disproportionate focus on former members of the armed forces and the police. We want to see these deaths being investigated in ways that are fair, balanced and, as I say, proportionate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a constituent, Mr. Hassan Mirza, a UK citizen, who for the best part of the last decade has been unsuccessfully trying simply to renew his passport. For some of our fellow citizens, the system is clearly broken. So can I ask the Prime Minister if her office, not the Home Secretary or the Immigration Minister, but if her office will review this case and then come back to this House and tell us if waiting 10 years simply to renew a passport is even remotely acceptable?
Can I assure the honourable gentleman I'll make sure the case is properly looked into?
extremely grateful. Dame Caroline Spellman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to associate myself with the fine words of the Prime Minister and others on the Armistice, and may I invite her to warmly welcome the choir of the Bundestag and its President, who will join our own Parliament choir this evening in a commemorative concert in Westminster Hall to mark this historic occasion.
I think the Right Honourable Lady was going to offer us a little sample of what is in store. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very happy to join my right honourable friend in welcoming the choir of the Bundestag and the German Vice President to this concert that is taking place this evening, a very fitting way to recognise what the centenary of the Armistice. As my right honourable friend may also know, the German President will be laying a wreath at the cenotaph this year. What Armistice gives us is an opportunity to come together to remember the immense sacrifices made in war, but also to join with our German friends to mark reconciliation and the peace that exists between our two nations today. The concert this evening is part of that, as will the German President's presence at the cenotaph be.
Albert Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly chooses North West Wales to spend her holidays, and her mountain walks inspires her to make decisions such as the 2017 general election. Amongst the delights of North Wales is its food and farming sector, and in particular the Menai Strait seafood, which relies on direct and fast exports to the European Union, which is now free of barriers and free of tariffs. Can the Prime Minister assure the House that that sector, automotive and aviation, can enjoy after the March the same free movement underpinned by a comprehensive customs union?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that he's named a number of sectors. We have heard from those sectors their concern about frictionless trade. The proposal we have put forward to the European Union that would provide for that frictionless trade as part of a free trade area.
Amber Rudd.
Mr. Speaker, BD Foods in Hastings is a successful food manufacturer and supplies hotels and restaurants. They recently made a very good breakfast sauce, Mr. Speaker, called the Full English Brexit, which I think will be appreciated by many of my colleagues, although it's a little hot for me. The Chief Executive, John Davis, has been in touch with me. He would like to invest £2.5 million, securing jobs and further investment in the business, but he is concerned about continued access to the single market as we leave the European Union, either through the single market or the common rule book. Could I ask the Prime Minister to bear in mind, as she concludes those negotiations, the importance of protecting investment and jobs all over the country?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that I think our honourable friend, the member for Wellingborough, might well like the hot English Brexit sauce that is to put on his breakfast sausages. But can I also reassure my right honourable friend that the plan that we have set out is a plan that recognises the importance of protecting jobs in this country, because what we want to see is that business-friendly customs model with the freedom to strike new trade deals around the world, but also a good trade deal with the European Union, with a free trade area, that common rule book for industrial goods and agricultural products. That will be good for jobs, and we're working towards that good deal.
Amy Crosby.
Up to £20 billion sits in pension funds unclaimed by pensioners. That's why the pensions dashboard, which helps people make sense of their pensions, is such a good idea. So why is the government backtracking on delivering the dashboard by putting the responsibility on the pensions industry? Does the Prime Minister really believe that the industry which is responsible for all this unclaimed money in the first place is best suited to take control of helping pensioners retrieve what is rightly theirs?
Well, it is. I agree with the honourable gentleman. It is important that people understand their pensions and understand what they are entitled to, and that's why the DWP is working with the pensions industry on this issue. And we aren't just working with them; we've actually put some money forward as part of this project to ensure that that information is there and is available to people.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Will the Prime Minister give reassurance to those of us in this House and in the country who voted to leave the European Union that under no circumstances will she recommend or agree to any alteration in the exit date of the 29th of March next year.
Hear, hear.
I'm happy to give that reassurance. We're leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019.
Voting day!
Many EU nationals live in my constituency. Does the Prime Minister think it's fair that these valued citizens who've lived here for years and contribute to their community should have to pay for the right to stay?
To the honourable gentleman, as I've said to others of his colleagues, we are protecting EU citizens' rights. We're protecting EU citizens' rights. That was one of the key issues that we put at the forefront of the discussions before the December joint report was agreed. But we've actually going further than that. I was pleased to be in Norway yesterday and to discuss with EEA and EFTA countries the protection that we will give to EEA and EFTA citizens when we leave the European Union.
Victoria Prentice.
There are 50,000 amputees in Syria. Will the Prime Minister join me at the Singing for Syrians flagship concert in St Margaret's to hear parliamentarians from across this House sing like they can hear us and remind the people from Syria, the civilians, that we have not forgotten them?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I will look at my diary. I can't guarantee standing here that I'll be able to attend that concert, but can I commend her and all those parliamentarians who will be taking part in that concert for the work they are doing in Singing for Syria is a great movement. It's a great thing that actually reminds people, not just raises money, but reminds people of the importance of remembering those civilians in Syria who, as she says, we want to ensure that they know they have not been forgotten.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only way Smolders and North Tyneside can continue to bid successfully for foundation jacket contracts is if the National Grid cables over the Tyne are moved. Will the Prime Minister commit her good officers to work with National Grid and have the cables removed by 2020 so that Smolders and other major North Tyneside and wider Tyneside manufacturers can win contracts and secure North East jobs for many years to come?
Well, can I say to the honourable lady that I would be pleased to make sure that a relevant minister in Bays looks at the issue that she has raised.
Mrs. Gillian Keegan.
During a recent meeting with primary school heads in Chichester, I was shocked to discover that every single one of them had been subject to violent attacks by pupils or parents. As the government launches its NHS violence reduction strategy today, will my right honourable friend consider what else we can do to protect our teachers in the valuable work that they do?
Yes, I'm certainly happy to look at the issue that my honourable friend has raised. And I think there is, she refers to what I assume is physical violence or attacks that teachers have been under. I myself have also seen cases where teachers have come under considerable I would say harassment and bullying on social media as well. And so I think this is an issue that we do need to look at.
Mr. Speaker, the Black Cultural Archives, based in Lambeth, I'm a patron of it, is the only national heritage centre dedicated to preserving and celebrating the histories of black people in this country. However, unlike other national institutions like the National Gallery or the British Museum, which get over 40% of their funding from central government, the BCA currently receives none and is at threat of closure. She talked about the race disparity audit. Can I ask the Prime Minister to explain the differential treatment of the BCA and in this Windrush year of all years to right this wrong and provide it with the funding it desperately needs?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, first of all, that there is, I think, a difference of approach that is taken between those museums that are considered to be national museums and those that have developed in other circumstances. I recognise what the honourable gentleman is saying about the importance of this particular organisation and this particular the relevance of what it is commemorating and what it is reflecting. And I will ask a DCMS minister to look at the issue that he has raised.
Andrew Jones.
High streets are the centres of our communities and they have a social as well as an economic function. But the internet has changed everything. That's why I welcome the levelling of the playing field announced in the budget this week with the cut in business rates and the future High Streets Fund, but will local businesses in Harrogate and Knaresborough be able to work with the local council to decide how that money is spent?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, thank you for highlighting the help that we are providing to the High Street through our future High Streets Fund. As he says, this will enable local areas to develop and fund plans to make their high streets and town centres fit for the future. And we'll be supporting local leadership with a High Streets task force, giving high streets and town centres expert advice on how to adapt and thrive. And it will be possible for local businesses to work with their local authorities to develop the plans that will indeed ensure that we continue to have plans for the High Street that are fit for our towns and cities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister inadvertently misled the House in response to my honourable friend from Bradford South over police pensions. This week, it's emerged that the National Police Chief Council have taken the unprecedented step to threaten legal action against this government over its £165 million raid on pensions. Isn't it the case that under her leadership, this government has destroyed relations with the police so considerably that they have risked public safety?
No, the Honourable Lady is wrong in her portrayal of what has happened. First of all, I did say that this issue of pensions was one that had been known for a number of years, and indeed it has been known about for a number of years. We are committed to public service pensions that are fair to the public workers, but also fair to the taxpayer. And it's important that the costs of these public service pensions, public sector pensions, are understood and fully recognised by government. Now, the budget has made clear that there is £4.5 billion available to support public services next year in managing increased pensions costs. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is working closely with the police to understand the impact of the pension changes and ensure we make the right funding decisions to support frontline services.
Finally, Mr. Philip Davis.
Speaker, can the Prime Minister tell the House why she and her government believe it's right that government spending is to be increased at a faster rate on overseas aid than for hard-pressed schools, policing and fire services in the UK? And whilst this House might be typically out of touch with public opinion on this issue, will she accept that the vast majority of the British people think that that warped priority is crazy crackers?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I continue to believe that it's right that the United Kingdom maintains its commitment to spend 0.7% of GNI on our international development. I would say to my honourable friend that I would suggest that he looks at the speech that in South Africa, when I was in South Africa in August. I gave a speech which explained how we want to ensure that international development aid is not just helping the most vulnerable people across the world, but also is helping countries to ensure that they can provide the economies, the good governments, the jobs that will take them out of needing that international development and that international aid in the future. I think it is right that we continue with our commitment to the poorest people across the world and to helping countries to ensure that they have a long-term sustainable future.
Thank you. Order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, point of order. Yes, I'm sure there will be. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Point of order.
All right, going to get down.
Very well. I'm sure that members leaving the chamber are doing so quickly and quietly so that the rest of us can attend to the point of order from the Honourable Lady, the member for Bristol West. Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr Speaker, helping my constituent C push child maintenance service to pursue the well-off but self-employed father of her 2 young children, I put in a written parliamentary question about the difference between maintenance recovery between self-employed and employed absent parents. They said they hold the data, but that it's too expensive to provide. So what guidance can you give me, Mr Speaker, for how I push past this brick wall in pursuit of feckless dads failing to pay the maintenance and letting down their children?
The Honourable Lady, for a point of order, my answer off the top of my head is twofold. Traditionally, the member of the government who has felt a particular responsibility to chase answers from ministers if they're not forthcoming, or to seek a substantive answer if it has not been provided, has been the Leader of the House. That's been the tradition over a very long period. I don't know whether the Honourable Lady has approached the Leader, but the Leader's on the bench, she'll have heard it. But it manifestly and incontrovertibly is the responsibility of ministers to answer questions. There are circumstances, I must advise the Honourable Lady, in which it can genuinely, credibly be claimed that the provision of an answer would be disproportionately expensive. Whether this is really the case in this instance sounds rather unlikely, given that the material is retained. But I would say that she might seek to enlist the assistance of the Leader. Alternatively, I would advise the Honourable Lady to write to the Chair of the Procedure Committee, an extremely distinguished Chair of the Procedure Committee, the Honourable Gentleman Member Broxbourne, who may well wish to assist her in a way that I know he has assisted members across the House pretty much throughout his tenure as distinguished Chair of that committee. I hope that that's helpful. Point of order, Simon Hall.
Mr Speaker, this is a sensitive issue, and I hope I phrased it correctly. We are all alert, Mr Speaker, to the scourge of drugs in our towns and cities. But I also think the House would agree that if the sins of the father and the mother can't be visited upon the sons, then the same is true, but in reverse. But there is a case, Mr Speaker, you'll be aware, currently alive and alert in the media about pass holders, or a pass holder of this place, which is, after all, an honour, not a right, who has been found guilty of drugs-related crime. And I wondered, Mr Speaker, in order to preserve what I hope all quarters of the House would agree is an important aspiration, namely public confidence in this place and those of people who carry passes, what role either the Commission or other House authorities have with regards to members of this place and to whom they issue passes.
Well, I'm immensely grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for his point of order, though mildly disappointed that he didn't furnish me with advance notice either of his intention to raise it, or better still, an indication as to its content. But what I must say to the Honourable Gentleman, and I say it in all courtesy, I've known the Honourable Gentleman for 30 years, and he's a very decent chap, is that it's got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with the House of Commons Commission. The matter is a matter for me. And I'm very clear about that. And if that matter is brought to my attention, which ideally it should be brought to my attention privately, I will discharge my responsibilities on the subject. And I hope that my bona fides in that matter over a long period are pretty unarguable. So I hope the Honourable Gentleman feels satisfied he's raised the point. I will deal with it sensibly. Thank you. Oh, yes, very well. Point of order, Catherine West.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's come to my attention that this week is Living Wage Week and it wasn't raised this morning in Prime Minister's questions. Could he please advise me how I can further highlight the question of Whitehall cleaners who have such a massive disparity of pay? They do serve the House of Commons as well as anyone else.
Well, I don't think they serve the House of Commons. I mean, I don't want to engage in a second reading style debate with the Honourable Lady on the subject. Well, they may well serve ministers, yes, who are members of the House of Commons, but they don't serve the House of Commons as an institution. Look, the Honourable Lady, I think, has achieved her objective in raising it. And let me just say, and I say this not least for newly elected members of the House who came into this place in 2017, and I say it with some considerable pride, this House is a living wage employer, as it should be. and I was determined that it should secure its accreditation from the Living Wage Foundation. So absolutely everybody who works here should be paid at least the London living wage. If there are examples of people who are working within the government service who are not receiving that remuneration, that is a matter of very considerable concern. The concern will have been heard by a Treasury Minister on the Treasury bench, and I can advise further the Honourable Lady that if she feels it has been inadequately aired in this chamber and she wants a debate on the matter, she might find she's successful. Okay, well, I hope that the point of order appetite has been satisfied, at least for today. And on the assumption that it has, colleagues, perhaps we can move on. And we come now to the 10-minute rule motion, for which the honourable gentleman has been patiently waiting. 10-minute rule motion, Mr. Luke Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the Banking and Post Office Services, Rural Areas and Small Communities Bill. I beg that leave be given to bring in a bill to amend the law relating to banking and post office services to make provisions to strengthen the access to banking for rural and small communities by placing the access to banking standard into a statutory footing, to place a duty on banks that have received taxpayer funds to establish a community investment fund when those banks leave a community, and to strengthen the provision of post office services for rural and small communities across the UK. Mr. Speaker, as a Liberal Conservative, I believe in the free market. However, many banks and financial institutions must shoulder considerable burden of responsibility for the 2008 recession and for their subsequent actions. They have endangered customers, they have taken money from government, and they are now happily abandoning some of the most vulnerable communities they claim to support. Now, I think very few people in this House would argue that the digital revolution is not having an impact on the way people bank. However, it is the speed at which banks are withdrawing these services, the uneven distribution of the services that remain, and the incredibly weak substitute that these banks are offering that is so completely unacceptable to our constituents. According to the Retail Banker International, the number of bank branches in the UK dropped by 37% between 2007 and 2017. Meanwhile, in 2015, the Campaign for Banking Services produced an estimate of the number of unbanked communities, which stated there are 840 communities with only one bank left and 1,500 communities that had lost all access to their banks. Since then, as an example, the Royal Bank of Scotland announced the closure of 603 branches across the United Kingdom since 2017, 60 of which are in Scotland and 3 of which in my constituency of Oakle and South Perthshire. Scant regard, Mr. Speaker, has been given for the impact of closing these branches on these rural communities. In the case of Cumberry and St Fillan's in my constituency, the elderly are being expected to make a 50-plus mile, approximately 2-hour round trip by bus, a journey which is hardly going to become more bearable as we enter into the cold winter months in Perthshire. It is also the profile of these the closures, which the University of Nottingham identified, which the largest decline in branch numbers are characterised by the least affluent third of the population, bearing the brunt of 2/3 of the net closures. This analysis was further reinforced by the Reuters news agency, who in their 2016 analysis of ONS figures found that more than 90% of the 600 closures between April 2015 and 2016 were in areas where median household income was below the British average of £27,600. At a time when financial inclusion and the need for enhanced social mobility is more important than ever, banks are pulling up the ladders of financial advancement for our poorer communities. And meanwhile, these retail banks, despite their justification for closures being consumer behaviour moving from branch to digital, are still opening branches. Opening branches in the oh-so-rural and disconnected wards of Chelsea, Canary Wharf and Clapham, areas with 99%, 96.2% and 99.9% superfast broadband connectivity versus the 85.5% in my constituency. They're serving the customers they want, not those who need their services. In the meantime, these retail banks have come to select committees here in this House and told us they've done enough to cater for our communities, providing mobile banks for the elderly in some of the coldest and most geographically challenging parts of the UK, driving online banking in constituencies that struggle with mobile signal, let alone superfast broadband, and providing single community bankers as a substitute for a full-service branch. It is simply not good enough, especially when many of these institutions took British taxpayers' funding 10 years ago. So, Mr. Speaker, when the banks refuse to listen, to their local customers and their elected representatives from across the House, I asked this House to do what it was intended for: legislate and stand up for the rights of small communities and vulnerable individuals. The bill I present today proposes three things. Firstly, to formalise the access to banking standard, making it a legal requirement for all banks. It will also strengthen the access to banking standard, adding a requirement for rural weighting to be taken into consideration as part of the impact assessment that is included within the standard. These further considerations would be in addition to the current criteria and would take into account local geography and winter weather patterns, local public transport links, including frequency and routes, and broadband and mobile coverage benchmarked against the national average. This bill will also make a requirement for closing a bank early to clearly state what consultation has taken place with the Post Office as an alternative provider of banking services. It will also include a requirement for ATM and a deposit service to be maintained as a basic level of service in a town or village. I would also like to add that this is not a criticism of the access to banking standards as it currently stands. Quite opposite, I believe it holds some excellent standards of best practice, but it's simply giving it a statutory footing that would give additional heft to hold the banks to account. Secondly, this bill would seek to establish a community fund, a £100,000 fund for each bank closure of banks that have had government funding or have government as a significant shareholder. It is widely recognised that bank branches not only provide vital services to local individuals, businesses and community groups, but they often occupy key positions within a town or village, contributing to the vibrancy of the high street and as an indicator of local economic dynamism. However, the bank's movement towards cities and out of the settlements they support creates a responsibility for them to provide ongoing services and support the communities and customers that they are abandoning. According to figures provided by the House of Commons Library, bank branch closures dampen SME lending growth by 63% on average in those postcodes that lose a bank branch. The figure grows to 104% in postcode areas that lose their last bank in town, where